So a little bit about me. I'm a writer, comedian, director, filmmaker, activist, a lot of things I don't get paid for, middle child. And I used to host a late night show called That Time of the Month that combined women and non-binary individuals in comedy, activism, and small businesses. And then when that got put on hiatus, which was our 5-year anniversary show, was literally the day before lockdown, I then started a show called No One Asked for This, which took a component of our show, the interview series, and that was on Instagram Live. So I would talk to different community organizers like Moms Demand Action's Shannon Watts, and now Congress members Greg Kassar and Jasmine Crockett, and I talk about the social injustices in the world that no one asked for, while I performed an activity at below average skill level that no one asked for. So that was my pandemic project. But I'm really excited to be joined by 3 wonderful individuals in town who are combining a comedy and activism in really fun and interesting and unique ways. So I will introduce them, starting directly from my left. Ivy Lee is a Vietnamese American comedian, writer, and actress based in Austin, Texas. She's the creator of the critically acclaimed Spotify Studios podcast, FOGO, Fear of Going Outside, a nature show by the most reluctant host ever. FOGO is featured on Delta flights. Also, I just saw your face in the airport the other day. It was Del, right? Yeah. It was like after you texted me, I'm like, Ivy, stop haunting me. And it's been in The Guardian, CBC, Oprah, and Outside Magazine. She's widely published as a reporter, a poet, and advocate on immigration and civil rights issues, and hosts the only queer comedy open mic in Austin. Her goal is to decolonize everything. Good luck, Austin. But make it comedy. And Yola, you can clap. Yeah. And Yola Lu is a comedian, writer, and actress based out of Austin, Texas. She's the co-founder of the all-Asian American improv troupe Y'all We Asian, and they performed at the San Francisco Sketch Fest, the Del Close Marathon, Out of Bounds Festival, and won the Austin Chronicle's Best of Austin's Critics Pick, as well as winners of 2 B. Iden Payne Awards. You can catch her performing with Y'all We Asian every first Friday of the month at Fallout Theater. Give it up for Yola. And our final panelist, Ben Levison, is the creative director for Texas Public Heritage and the Texas Bull. He is based here in Austin, and he is very humble because he gave me a very short bio, but he's done a lot of amazing work, including organizing on Obama's campaigns. We're going to dig in a little bit more about how he combines comedy and activism in his current roles. But to kick it off, anyone can answer. Yeah, give it up for Ben. I want to know, what role does comedy play in activism, and vice versa? Why is it necessary for the two to intersect?
I have a mic, and I think it would be really unfortunate for this panel to be kicked off by the token white man. So I guess I'll answer.
We love you, Ben, though.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are accustomed to thinking about comedy and activism as changing hearts and minds, and I used to do that. What I have been doing more of late is using comedy to heal activists, using comedy to heal my community, okay? So like Tongue in Cheek, the monthly queer mic that I host at Swan Dive, I know it sounds like it should be tongue in cheek, but the audience voted it's tongue and cheek because it sounds like a pub. The tongue in cheek, right where you go and, okay, get poppers and margaritas. That space, it's not at a traditional comedy club because traditional comedy clubs are like marred with transphobia and misogyny. Do you know what I mean? So it's at Swan Dive, which is gorgeous, and it's not sticky, and it has a beautiful green room, and the drinks are amazing, and the bartenders are gorgeous. Do you know what I mean? Because I don't want to put my comics in a training gym that makes them feel unsafe, because that's not the point of doing queer comedy. The point of doing queer comedy is to heal my community. So I've been doing, for example, I just did a gig for Texas Grassroots Network. You should totally go. This is one of the member orgs, blackvotersmatterfund.org. I know if you're here at South by, you can probably afford to give them $10. Let's be real. I know you're not like badge people, because if you're badge people, I'd be like, I know you can afford $200. But it's $10 donation. Come on, guys. Black voters matter. They're literally being criminalized in this state. So my show Fogo, Fear of Going Outside, it's a nature show from my perspective, right? Because usually nature shows are hosted by reckless white men, and their only qualification is that they have an accent. Do you know what I mean? And the reason why I'm doing this show instead of a show that's important
and brave
and brave, reason why I'm not having these brave conversations, right, is because I am no longer at this stage of my life. I'm a lot older than I look. A lot older than I look. Because I look like a teen mom. But I'm actually 1.5 IUDs away from menopause. I was just trying to get Yola to laugh. So Fogo, Fear of Going Outside is just trying to figure out how to go camping in season 1 and trying to figure out how to go hunting in season 2. Out now. It's a shit show. Yeah, okay, it's a shit show. Camping is like low-key racist. Hunting is high-key racist. Okay, but that's not what I excited. That's not why I didn't set out to make an important show. I'm no longer making comedy to convince people that I am a human being. I am making art to be a human being. Does that make sense? Okay. But it has to be comedy, or else I would be broken. So that's why, because it's a good coping mechanism.
Ben, you go next.
As the responsible white man, I will go last.
No, you go next.
No, you're gonna do.
You go next.
Ben, take up space, Ben.
Yes, Ben.
Go, Ben.
Okay. What was the question?
What role does comedy play in activism and vice versa? Why is it necessary for the two to intersect?
Okay. I think on the simplest level, it's a way to get attention, and in a very saturated media environment, you need to always be thinking of novel ways to do that. I think it is also a mechanism to say things that cannot be said in maybe polite mainstream conversation, and that's in any space. And so even in the context of creating media around public education, which is what my organization, Texas Public Heritage, does, our goal is to support teachers and public schools, and specifically advocate for policies that will help those institutions during the legislative session. So we are pro-teacher pay raise, anti-voucher, pro-full school funding. And in some of those contexts, like, how do we talk to people or educate people about like what vouchers are and why they're bad in a really short amount of time? We could try to explain, or we could just say that people who are pushing them are nuts and they're bullshit. It's a scam. And that's one way that we did that. So we had an ad where we essentially took the Crazy Ones ad from Apple and we just mapped it onto Republican legislators and called out vouchers are a scam. It's bullshit. So again, it's just saying things in a way that you can't normally say. And I think that helps you when the goal is directed towards an objective, a legislative objective.
So to be honest, like at first I was just like, why am I asked to speak on this panel? Because I'm not an activist, but I think a lot of the stuff that I do is I focus a lot on representation in media. I co-founded an organization called Disoriented Comedy when I first started doing comedy, because for the longest time I was the only female Asian comic in Seattle when I had just started, and it was very lonely, and I was getting a lot of attention being the only Asian American comic there. And then so I had some stuff written about me, and then other comics from different states actually reached out because there were so few of us at that time that we wanted to create something to amplify other women and non-binary folks' voices in the comedy sphere, because there just wasn't that many. I mean, I think right now it's like you, me, Ivy, Ashley Sharma. I don't know. In terms of like comics, female Asian American comics, just in Austin. And so it was just like we would produce these like really big shows and try to create this like sisterhood of like comedians from like all different parts of the world. And we would also we would partner with organizations for these comedy shows to like get awareness for them. I remember one of the shows we did was there is for the nail tech workers for nail salons where they wanted better working environments. Basically, they were trying to get better working environments, and then we would donate money to them from our ticket sales, and just try to get awareness that, hey, this is something like that happens. Like, you go and get your nails done. They are working in very unsafe working environments, and so we would usually get speakers and everything, and it's just like a like people go there to laugh, but then they also are educated about like causes that they're probably not aware of, and that's kind of always what I have been doing. And even in I've been a showrunner for I've been in Austin for 10 years, and I've been running shows probably for the last 8 years. And I've always tried to create, like Ivy created an environment for everybody to feel safe. And I just booted off a rapist off my show because I did not know. And I was just like, nope, I need to create a safe environment for all of my performers. And I try to always try to think about diversity in all of my booking as well. I feel like I've been talking for too long. I'm going to shut up. I'm sorry.
Thank you all for those answers. Yeah, give it up. All right, we'll go back to Ivy. So during the pandemic, you made the career shift from working full-time at Texas Civil Rights Project, that's how we first met, to full-time creative, working on your podcast and then producing comedy shows. Can you speak to what motivated that decision and what you've learned from it, making that shift from full-time activist to full-time comedy?
Mostly, it's because working in civil rights in Texas is a terrible fucking job.
Lots of comedy, though, right?
No. Has anybody heard of secondary trauma? Are we a primary trauma crowd? I'm a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B, okay? I highly recommend the book for activists here in the room. It's called Trauma Stewardship. It really helped me come up with ways to cope with the sacrifices that I was having to make working on the front lines of border justice, criminal justice and abolition, and weirdly voting rights. I didn't know voting rights could fuck you up that bad. But yeah, no, right? Like just even doing the press clips report, right, for the organization, because I was working in narrative change at that time. Most of my career has been in narrative change, right? So narrative change is when you're kind of like framing, you're like kind of shifting the frame of civic discourse so that it moves the window, what we call the Overton window in this line of work, that moves or broadens or moves it closer to it's the window of what the public thinks is possible. Do you know what I mean? So like it used to be that like don't ask, don't tell was like the height of like liberal possibility. Do you know what I mean? And then because they're like, well, like the best we can do to balance all of these valid interests, right, is to just like, don't ask, don't tell me. So the Overton window is the window of civic discourse of what's possible. And so I was doing narrative change to change that. For example, we have a narrative that like criminals are less than human. And therefore can be put away and disappeared. And anybody that you turn into a criminal, you can do anything that you want to do to them. And so we are criminalizing voting, we're criminalizing abortion, we're criminalizing immigration, which is literally just changing your address, right? But now that we've made it a crime to change your address in that way, now we're allowed to do whatever we want, including putting them in prisons for what is a civic, what should be like a ticketable offense, right? We're filling up prisons that are no longer serving as state and federal prisons because they don't meet the building standards for those prisons any longer. And so we are putting immigrants we do not have we do not have to imprison them. We're using our discretion to imprison them and keep those buildings in use, and people are okay with that because we have decided that that's what these people are. Is they're lawbreakers and they're criminals and they're infringing our social contract. So that's what narrative change does. And to do that, you have to bear witness to a lot of terrible, terrible things, and then decide what to do with them bit by bit, and which of these stories are worth like putting forward, to the public and explaining in certain ways, or you see problematic journalists like talking about them in a way that is not helpful toward a solution to the problem or whatever, to help educate them on the nuances of the issues and things like that. So I was interviewing clients at the Texas Civil Rights Project. I was doing all this stuff, and I was really starting to bring that work home, but I stuck it out until the election because it was just that kind of time in my country, and the time it demanded sacrifice, and we made those sacrifices. And then I left and never turned back. And the reason why, so that's why I left. The reason why I never turned back is, I would say, in just my first 1.5 years of doing comedy full time, I was able to affect as much impact and change as, I wouldn't say like my entire narrative change career, but in my culture career, which is basically what being an artist is culture change, right? And by doing culture change instead of narrative change, I feel like it's like 1.5 years is equivalent to maybe 4 years of the work that I was doing then. And I am having so much more fun too. Yeah, so that's why I'm here.
So are you saying like my over 10 years in comedy can equate to like 40 years of law school? Like I can tell my mom that? Because like I'm willing to tell my mom that. But yeah,
law school isn't affecting change, but that's another conversation.
Yeah, that's another panel. That's another day. Ben, I want you to talk more about Texas Public Heritage and the Texas Bowl, it's the other organization you run, how your background in organizing led you to starting those organizations, and what you do in the day-to-day of that.
Sure. As a law school graduate, I can
Sorry. My mom would love you, but...
but I didn't list that in my bio because it is not really relevant to what I do day to day. Both projects really came out of a place of, we aren't winning races to get power to affect the change that we need, and from any issue across the board, whether it's voting rights, whether it's immigration, whether it's women's rights, anyone's rights. And how do we create leverage? How do we create pressure on lawmakers to try to get some marginal wins or some just straight out wins? And there were a group of people that came together and said, well, one thing the right does really well is media. And so why don't we use that in the same way that they do, but use it against them? And so that was really the impetus for the Texas Public Heritage work. And as a basic straight white guy, I was like, yeah, I can figure out ways to make other straight white guys feel embarrassed and ashamed. I can do that. Cool. So, a good example of that is we took the Budweiser ad, Real Men of Genius. I don't know. Does anyone remember that? Yeah. Okay. So we just did a series of videos sort of using that concept to talk about the Texas Education Agency head, Mike Morath, who, over a year ago put together a task force to figure out why there was a teacher shortage. Well, it's like, because you don't pay them enough, Mike. You don't need to be a genius to know that. And so we did an ad, this past fall, basically highlighting that, and that had, despite a pretty small universe, it had an outsized impact because no one's ever gone after that guy before on anything, at least publicly. And so, we just figured, why don't we try this and see what happens? And so I know for a fact he saw it. Hi, Mike. I know that it didn't make him very comfortable. And so, we know that incremental gains like that over time, we hope will have an impact in along with everyone else's voice. And so like we did an ad in January with Dan Patrick as the subject of one of those ads, and highlighted the fact that he's changed his last name and the fact that he's now changing, or he and Abbott are now changing what they call vouchers, right? So we've gone from vouchers to school choice to parental empowerment to parental rights, whatever you want to call it, it's still the same thing. And so we said, we know that like you're an expert at like polishing a turd by changing its name, but it's still the same thing, right? That was the punchline of the ad. So like this is not, I would say I'm not breaking any ground in using comedy, but sometimes the lowest common denominator stuff works. So that's sort of what what my day-to-day work is really thinking of how do we take these complex issues, simplify them, and make them funny-ish. Real funny is the professionals' work, but we do well enough. And the Texas Bowl is just another angle to do that. It's another mechanism. So it's a brand that we just decided to create. And it is basically The Onion, but for Texas politics. So again, just another way to say things that are harder to say, or harder for elected officials to say, harder for sort of the institutional folks to say. We're just creating a voice and a mechanism to do that.
Yeah, I mean, give it a. I know you're diminishing your contributions to comedy, but like roasts are like one of my favorite mediums of comedy, and I think it really does have such an important role. And like our lawmakers are fucking ridiculous. Like Ken Paxton running away from being served to show up to court. Like, you can't make this stuff up. So I think it's important to call them out and make them feel like the idiots that they are, and it allows us to laugh about it. Let's go over to Yola. So can you talk about the other projects you've worked on? So early in the pandemic, you kicked off 21 Days of Action, and then you were also doing monologues under your show, Oh Wow Nighttime, and that was addressing news headlines in a comedic format. So can you speak more to that?
Yeah. So I feel like after George Floyd was murdered, everybody kind of was wondering, like, what can we do as a community or just as an individual to create change. And I don't know about you guys, but I personally felt very helpless. And it was during the pandemic, so it's like you couldn't. Most of the time, I would like put on a benefit show or something like that, and you just couldn't do that during the pandemic. So I wanted to ask my community to come together and participate in this like 21 Days of Action with me, which every single day I would find either a cause or an organization to participate in, either by like writing letters to your congresspeople. It would be sometimes it was like a very easy thing, like signing this petition, something like that. And I would create a Google Doc where everybody could go in and follow each day. And people have told me that it was very helpful for people that didn't know what to do, because I would get all the resources for them, like all the emails, all the numbers, everything. I would write out templates of like notes for people to use where they could literally just copy and paste it and then send it out. And I would try to insert some comedy in I actually had a very fun time writing these letters, because I got to kind of insert some of my personality in there. So it didn't match with everybody's voice, but it was my voice. And then with Oh Wow Nighttime, it had first started, it was mostly just like it would be my dream to be a weekend update writer for Saturday Night Live. And then so I just wanted to kind of like practice like writing these monologue jokes with like local headlines. And then, but some of my headlines would definitely get a little bit more political. Like I had some friends reach out to me. They were like, you shouldn't talk about Amazon like that, because like you don't know if they're
poor little Amazon.
Right.
Poor mom and dad shop Amazon.
Right. They're like, you shouldn't talk they're like, I hope you never try to get a job at Amazon with what you're saying about them. And then I was just like, okay, whatever. And then so, but it would be calling out certain things and trying to like make light of what we were seeing and poke fun, maybe kind of like what you're doing in a way. And it did make some people uncomfortable, especially talking like with some of my network talking about Trump, and because it's such an easy target, honestly. But that's kind of like what I was trying to do during the pandemic, to kind of give back to my community and use whatever little skills that I have for that. So, yeah.
No, it was really helpful. I remember like I was so overwhelmed that I'd be like, when I do my monthly newsletter, I would be like, go look at Yola's Google Doc. Like I just like send people to your thing, because I was like, I don't have time. I'm freelancing 100 jobs. So let's talk about examples from your work or others' works that you admire where comedy has either been a more effective tool than traditional organizing methods to motivate people to take action, or you made activism more accessible to a comedy community or audience. And I frame it this way because like Yola and I come from the comedy side and are, sometimes cosplay as activists. Like we're trying to, figure out how to be more supportive as comedians in this community. And Ivy and Ben come from the organizing side, and you have that background and knowledge and history of working in the field, and then now starting to use your comedy as a way to make things more accessible for different audiences. So I want to hear like how you've used it from your different ways in, and how it's been more effective than in your previous roles.
I can start. Yeah. So for the Texas Bowl, you are actually welcome to become a writer. Let's talk after. But I found myself going to the Creek in the Cave comedy club a lot during the pandemic. It's just walking distance to my apartment, sorry. But when we had the idea for the Texas Bowl, I was like, well, we need headline writers, and I don't really know any comedians. So I just went up to someone after a show and said, hey, would you be interested in doing this? And they're like, well, I don't really know a lot about politics. And I'm like, neither do the people legislating, so it's fine. And I do, but in all seriousness, I think that's a major part of it. I think the comics who were not particularly political were like, well, I want to get it right. I want to get the policy right. And I think if you've done this long enough, you sort of understand, like, it would be nice if that was really what it was about. Unfortunately, it's not most of the time. And so it's really about helping them realize that, like, if you're a good person and you're using common sense, generally you know what's going on. And you should feel confident in your voice and in your sense of humor to communicate that to other folks who sort of come at it with your amount of perspective and context. So that's the immediate example I can think of. But.
You can't talk about a comedy club that way, Yola. What if you ever want a spot at that comedy club? What if... For me, it goes, but I feel like skill sets from organizing have worked really well in the arts and comedy. And then comedy also actually, like, it's not like I quit my job and then I became funny. Do you know what I mean? Like, I've always been a riot. Okay. I'm a raging bisexual Asian American woman with ADHD. Okay, so like, can I hear? Okay, POC, LGBTQ plus with ADHD. Yeah,
all the acronyms.
Let me hear it. Okay, right. So I have been hysterical my entire life. And so, for example, I still do periodically, when I testify at city council, or if I testify at the Texas State Legislature on an issue with some organization, or sometimes just kind of my own accord as an Asian mom about town who has her concerns about gentrification. Sometimes I will literally be the only person on my side of an issue in an entire room, right? Because it's always the people with all this time on their hands that are like, no, I don't want a bus stop on my street, like, I could tell you so many stories, okay? Sometimes I will literally be the only person that signed up to speak on my side of an issue. But because I am so much more entertaining than them, mine is the only quote that makes it in the evening news. Do you know what I mean? Right. So humor is effective kind of, on all sides. And I want to push back. So what you said, Ben, about like the right is using media like better than us, or culture better than us. I had several people say that to me tonight. And that, I disagree with that. I think that the reason why the other side is investing so heavily in culture, like building their own mainstream television networks and things like that, they've invested so much, is because we are so good at it almost effortlessly. Like, sometimes we're not even trying to be that good at it, and we are so good at it because all the funny gays are on our side. Do you know what I mean? Right? They've got well, you know who they've got. They've got
Gutfield, please.
You know, all right.
Gutfield.
I mean, there are definitely some gays over there that I'm like, y'all are sleeper cell agents because you are trolling. Like, you have to be trolling on their side, and I can't wait for somebody to say like the code word like pumpkin spice, and they're just be like, stay into action. They're like, every hole's legal now. Okay, out of nowhere. No. So that's how sometimes humor would be more effective when I was on the organizing side, right? Also, humor is really effective when I was in the business of recruiting, right? So early in your career as an activist, a lot of your job is recruiting people, and it doesn't matter if they start out agreeing with you or not. Your job is to find common ground and and start to help them develop their political identity, and hopefully, and hopefully, if your cause is just, most people, when they think about it hard enough, will end up in your camp, and then you can start to build community power, right? Community organizing from this perspective, for community organizing for liberation is a slow process, right? It's artisanal change, right? Because the easy stuff is a very fascist, structurally fascist, right? It's like top down, do what I say, kind of power. And people who don't have formal power, doesn't mean they don't have power, right? But people who don't have formal power have other kinds of power. Power in numbers, power in persuasion, power in information, power in community ties. There's lots of other ways to have power. There's the entire universe. There's no like trump card, everything is like 10,000 games of rock, paper, scissors. That's what power struggles are, is you're just playing rock, paper, scissors, and you need to understand which one of those things that you are, right? So in that kind of organizing, I used humor a lot to bridge and open up really uncomfortable discussions, right? Like, people are really scared to talk about race, but then when the minority in the room makes a really racist joke, everybody, which I make so many racist jokes, Megan knows.
Right, racist right here.
I literally, Ben, I went up to 5 different white men and be like, oh my God, Ben, before I was like, oh my God, Ben. And I was like, oh, and none of them were Ben. To your credit, one of them humored me and was super polite about it for like 20 minutes before he was like, I'm actually someone else. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. You should just be on our panel. But he declined. He did not decide to take up the space. Thank you very much. And then he took a picture. And then he took an Instagram picture for us. So yeah, if you want a job.
This is a safe space.
Okay. Thank you for your service. And it made it very effective because, like what you were saying, where people, when they don't have the, there's just such a, kind of in general media, there is such a surface level discussion of a lot of these issues, so that like once they kind of get past like the shallow end of the pool, people get super uncomfortable. Even comics, right, get super uncomfortable, don't want to talk about it because they feel like they don't know. And humor is just a way to just kind of take that tension out of the air and be like, no, well, now you represent your race. Go ahead. Like this is like, let's go. Let's just get it all out there, So that's what I think humor helped me so much in the organizing space, or to be able to speak truth to power, like that helped a lot when I'm like literally in rooms full of power, right? Like to be able to make a point quickly when I have the least amount of time of anybody to speak, Now, organizing here in comedy, the reason why I find this over here, but now I'm not in the recruiting part of my activist pipeline any longer. It is very, which is good. Whew, you go gray real fast doing that kind of work. You kind of advance, and then kind of new activists like kind of get into that job, right? And then now you're kind of, then you move along in your career, and then you're more like strategizing about power itself and things like that. So I'm not doing that work anymore. And then, but doing this work, so everybody is so traumatized. And trauma shapes you in the way that you communicate and the way that you can relate to other people. And so a lot of times, sometimes when you're organizing, the most frustrating thing is not your opposition, but your allies, right? Like having or doing coalitions, right? Like, for example, LGBTQIA+ is not one identity. It is a political identity. It's a political coalition of people that say, together we are stronger than we are apart, and that we are committing to helping each other advance our issues, even if that specific issue isn't specific to me, right? And not that it's a perfect coalition, not that it's perfectly intersectional or anything, but just to kind of explain like what some of these coalitions do, and that maybe you have witnessed infighting across like the letters or like whatever. Well, that happens in every kind of coalition, right? When teachers and organized labor organizes, auto workers have different issues than nurses, for example. It's like they have one has gender pay disparity, one has geography or something like that, and they start infighting with each other, and then they start splitting off, and then we start diminishing our own power. Well, with comedy, right, and then we start to split off like the Christians do. Like every time they're like, oh my God, this is the book, this is not real. Oh, new church, right? Like every time they just and they wonder why nobody's going to church. Like you keep dividing your power. It's like totally ridiculous. Anyway, I'm not a Christian. I don't have a dog in that fight. I just think it's foolish. Because I'm an organizer, right? So now I am bringing organizing ability over into comedy because I'm coming from organizing. So like for example, I had to negotiate a deal with Spotify. Okay. Is this being recorded? Because I have.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
I just remember that now.
Okay, because I do have a non-disparagement clause in my contract. So, so let's pretend that you are negotiating a contract as an individual artist with a big corporate entity during, I don't know, late stage capitalism. And there is a tendency in free market economics is that you want to buy low and sell high, so to speak. And so they're going to tell creators like Yola, like Megan, that you should be lucky to even be here, right? Because like we are holding all the keys to the kingdom, and you should just even be lucky to be here. You should be lucky. You just be grateful that you survived the Hunger Games of that contest where we were like, where they all had to fight to the death, and the one that lived got to be like the one minority book we published this year in our DEI program. And there was that. I saw that was a perspective that was being reflected to me from a lot of organizations that were a lot more, at least on paper and at least in their net worth, a lot more powerful than me. And they were like, you should be lucky to be here. We're not going to negotiate. A lot of people said that, and I said, oh, well, my family's Vietnamese. Negotiating is literally one of my favorite things to do. I negotiate at TJ Maxx. At Nordstrom, I don't pay full price for anything. The little tuk-tuks that go downtown here. Do you know what I'm talking? What are they called? What are they called in English? Pedicabs? Yeah. You're no okay. I negotiate for the fun of it. Then I tip them crazy because I'm pro-labor. Anyway, every single person that I walked away from a negotiation from came back. And do you know why? Is it my charm? Yeah. It is because they want you to think that you are a dime a dozen, okay? But artists with compelling voices and good ideas that audiences like, who can actually execute on them, who are telling stories that have not been told before, are not a dime a dozen. A little bit because we're special, but a little bit because they never let us tell our stories before. A little bit their fault, right? A little bit your fault that you're having to pay extra for this, right? And if your CEO is like, you have to make 1,000 podcast deals this year, you can't afford to just walk away from the negotiating table with that artist if that artist stands firm. And the thing that I was standing firm for was not representation, because we have plenty of people who are working on representation, and we are making progress on representation. But media is a power structure. Media is a power structure, and all of the power structures that we are living under right now are white supremacist patriarchal power structures. And therefore, I am using my artistic capital, my creative capital, right? This voice that I protected after, gosh, how many years of public school telling me that the way I talk is wrong, the way I tell stories in the wrong order, my words are not literary enough or whatever, right? And then only to move to Austin, Texas, where a bunch of white dudes running improv theaters want to charge me hundreds of dollars per course to teach me back the thing that I have been doing my entire life, because everyone in my community talks like that. Everyone in my community is hilarious. Everyone in where I'm from, because I'm from the hood. I'm from the hood in Dallas, Texas. And right, like that's literally just where I'm from, behind the Hong Kong supermarket on one side and the Forest Lane, like not the good part of Forest Lane, Dallas, Texas on the other side, okay? That's where I'm from. Everybody where I'm from tell stories in the funniest order. And then you go to school and your white teachers are like, no, you're supposed to tell stories in chronological order or right to left or like whatever, right? And then you get to improv and white guys who did mushrooms one time are like, actually, you can make other choices, you know? And then they gatekeep with all this vocabulary because that's the only way they knew how to learn it. They're like, oh, I learned about feelings and I put a word on it. You know, I learned about this structure where you tell things in the funniest order and now it's called a herald or whatever, right? And we're gonna charge you hundreds of dollars to learn it. And if you don't like the culture here, the sticky-fingered culture here, well then you don't, yeah. And a lot of people accept these no's from people. A lot of people would say, well, I never got to the negotiating table, or I did feel lucky, so I did just say yes, even though it made me a little bit uncomfortable. And that does nothing for, that is, you came with power, and then you didn't use it to change the media structure. So I held strong because I knew, since everybody else had also taken my call, had also taken my meeting, and also come back to the table, I knew that I had more power than they were trying to express to me that I had. And I used it to make structural change. I used it to set the deals differently for the other women of color in the accelerator program, to make sure that the composer and the producers and the other people who weren't the on-mic talent, the representation, you know, were able to keep their intellectual property rights and things like that. Because music, so podcast deals, a lot of them are based on music deals, and the music industry is, I mean, most of art, but famously the music industry is made on the exploitation of people of color and their cultural assets, right? So it is based on exploitation. And so and it's not that I want everybody who does business with me to prosper. But in order to do that, we will, so that it's everyone prospers instead of some people are exploited and some of those people benefit from that exploitation, right? That there is a way to make it so that everybody prospers. And I had to use that, and it was so awkward because when you are Asian, in particular, my ethnic group, representation for representation's sake, with nothing else attached to it, is actually often used to entrench white supremacy. It's used as being like, look, we got one of them.
I'm the token Arab.
Right. We got one, which means we must be good. We must be fine, and we don't need to change anything else. We don't need to the theory of change from capitalism is always, well, they just don't have the education and work ethic that us rich people have, you know. That must be it. So we're gonna, instead of training programs for your gatekeepers to recognize their bias, we're gonna have training programs where people of color have to compete, or women or whatever, right, have to compete to have a little bit of a slot. I feel like I'm getting on a soapbox. No. Are we almost out of time? I feel like I'm on it because I am.
Well, I'm like signing up for this course.
If y'all got a soapbox, I'll get on it. You know.
But I mean, like what you're saying, and to wrap things up nicely, I think what we're all talking about here is like, you know, compensation for the work that these people for the work that the teachers are doing who are shaping our fucking youth. Because I'm telling you, Governor Abbott's not shaping our youth's minds. If anything, he's making their minds illegal and banning every frickin' book and giving them a gun instead. And it's like, yeah, let's talk shit about Amazon. I will talk shit about Amazon to the end of days. Katie Stone, another comedian in town, like when Amazon was treating its employees like shit during the early days of the pandemic, she was like, if you go an entire month without using Amazon, I will illustrate like you as a cartoon. And like that was a cool way for her to use her art and her comedic ability to get, you know, people to like, you know, protest against this big oligarch. And And it's the scarcity model. It's a scarcity model of like, we can only check off one box for this one person. By the way, I've been in like so many fellowships and grants, and I still can't get paid as a writer director.
It's like the house Negro. It's like the house Negro model. It's like the plantation model.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I'm not throwing shade, by the way. I just really want to make it clear because we're being recorded. That I'm not throwing shade. I am a beneficiary of many of these programs. That's how I know that they're Hunger Games, because I've been in the Coliseum many, many times and been able to make it out alive. Okay. So I am not throwing any shade to any individual artist at any point in this pipeline of social justice, of structural and power change, of any pipeline for any reason, or that people, like, I'm not saying don't apply to these programs or whatever. I never, ever, ever blame individual people for systemic problems. Do you know what I mean? Or like punch, or like penalize it, because there's no good there's just no good choices.
They're following the institutions and the systems that they have inherited.
Right, because and even if they are aware, right, they're following them because every day you're just having to choose between do I take food out of my kids' mouths today to make it better for my grandkids? Do you know what I mean? It's like there are no good choices. So I just want to make it, because I feel like sometimes I talk about this and it makes people think that I'm like throwing shade at individual people, and like, no, I love everybody that I work with at Spotify, right? I'm talking about, and Spotify is, and literally there is no media power structure that is guiltless in this, right? They're the fourth leg of democracy.
If you operate in capitalism, you're automatically
sure, but I mean, but in democracy, right? That it's like checks and balances. Well, we need to check some motherfuckers. You know, like there is no branch there's no branch in this that is not that is the one size fits all solution, you know, to these problems. That like there has to be people working on electoral strategy. Can't be me. I don't want to be candidates. Can't be me. You know, there's to be people working on electoral politics, right? But at the same time, like we can't out-organize gerrymandering and racist maps, right? There has to be people working on judicial issues. People forget about, the right hasn't forgotten about how to organize judicially. That's why we have the Supreme Court that we have, okay? And obviously, legislatively, executive branch. Your police officers are your executive branch, or the branch of enforcement. But media is the fourth branch of democracy, and it is a power structure too. Even the reporters that are on your side, even the comedians that are on your side, sometimes unknowingly are participating by default in the status quo. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And comedy is, I feel like, a way to say it in a way that's not rude. Like, so sometimes comedy, you got to roast and you got to be rude, but a lot of times, right, the joke is like the sweet way to tell somebody, like, bro.
Yeah.
You know?
It's kind of why satire is protected by law. Like why SNL doesn't get sued when they have like literally like a State Farm commercial where like the guy like is going to kill the man or whatever, you know. Anyway, we're going on a tangent. I want to give it up for our panelists that have shared their expertise and experiences. And very quickly, can you just tell us, the audience, where to find you and how to support your work?
So you could find me on my website, yolalucomedy.com. I am currently working on a short film right now that is kind of autobiographical, that is in post-production and should be coming out shortly. But if I ever have another Indiegogo, please support it because I need the money. But yes, Ben.
We are texasheritage.org and Instagram and Twitter at TexasHeritage_, and the Texas Bull is at the TX Bull on Instagram and Twitter, and we are going to be putting out videos every week from now until the end of the legislative session. So as the kids say on YouTube, like, share, subscribe. Thank you.
And hopefully just one legislative session this time, not like the four. What did we have, like 4 last time?
Yeah, we hope, but who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe if we get 3, we'll get the 4th one free this time.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can find me. Ben, do you have your phone? I need a follow. Can you get your phone out real quick? My Instagram
She's
is
a very good organizer.
My Instagram is at Ivy Lee with 1 E. The phrase, well, also it's IVYLEWITHONEE. Ivy Lee with 1 E. Okay. Because my name won't change. Because when I was young, it was like my email was like vietrappa@yahoo.com and AOL, and now I'm like, no, my name won't change. That should be my
You're
handle.
not Dan Patrick.
Okay.
What if I ask you to just type it for me?
Can I just? Okay, yeah, just make the women do the labor for you.
People helping.
That's fine.
Because,
And my podcast is FOGO, Fear of Going Outside. It's available anywhere. Yeah, you found it. It's available anywhere. You listen to podcasts, but it helps a little bit more if you listen to it on Spotify.
Thank you. And you can follow me at Megan R. Ross on Instagram, and come up to me and I'll tell you how South by Southwest is unethical as fuck. All right. Have a good night.